Well, I've read the notes that you guys have written, and I've read the complaints and the concerns and all this other stuff. I think the big question that we have to ask ourselves is there a way that we can make Football Manager more difficult, right? One of the problems with figuring out that like pace and acceleration are the things that make the game engine run. One of the problems with figuring out all the little tricks you can do to assign guys for cheaper. One of the problems with knowing that all you have to do is sign young players is that the game starts to become a little bit too easy, right? That's one of the biggest issues you run into. The game, which you once thought was difficult and was really complex, now seems really simple. All you have to do is look for like 2 or 3 different attributes, sign players who have that, and then almost no matter what tactic you put out there, you're going to win. So what do you do? So how do you make it harder? There's a couple of examples and a couple of ideas that come to mind. The biggest one is to create parameters around which you have to manage. So for example, a lot of people do this where they'll have a save where they're not allowed to do any transfers at all. So you can only build up using your youth squad. That makes things difficult because most of your youth players are going to be inconsistent or going to be injury prone or are not going to have the stats that you want. And so depending upon your level and depending upon what's expected of you, you might find yourself without a job in game pretty quickly, right? There's a famous youth challenge that comes up every year on the Football Manager forums. Everybody tries to do that, and you end up restarting over and over and over again because you got a bad youth draw, and then you have to go back and try it again, right? There's a variation of this challenge that some have done on YouTube where you allow yourself only to hire players who are teenagers, right? But the problem with that is that if you know you need to look for fast teenagers, it's really easy to take advantage of the computer. In fact, you can make better transfers doing that than you would make otherwise. So that's an issue. That's a big problem. You can't just rely on that sort of challenge to make things harder for yourself. It's really easy to use that challenge and to turn your team into an incredibly wealthy team, and to do so without having a whole bunch of other things going on at the beginning of the save, a bunch of other advantages and stuff. Some people like to do a save where you're not staying at one club and instead you're going from club to club to sort of see where you end up, right? Do sort of like a nomad save or a wanderer save or something like that. That's not really too bad. Although I will tell you, you have to keep in mind that Football Manager does not change when you go from one country to the next. So if you start the game out in like Rwanda and then you wind up in North Korea, the game will be the same, it's just the names that change. And nobody cares that you don't speak the language or that you're a foreigner or anything like that. And then if you wind up going straight from there to like Greece, and then you go to Israel, and then you go to Germany, it's not going to matter one way or another, right? The game's going to be the same no matter where you go, and you'll easily be able to take most players with you from one place to the next, assuming that they like you and that they want to continue to play with you. So while that does add a little amount of challenge, that sort of gameplay is really better for like an immersive type thing, right? It's better for sort of the storylines that come out of it. Now, I will say, because I've tried this before, you don't necessarily want to try one of those challenges that has you going to like every country in the world. And the reason why is not just because it gets boring. It does. The real reason why is because there are problems with the game engine itself. If you start out in like a real small island, I tried this one, start off in Kiribati, right? Start off in Kiribati with nothing, with no experience. Well, in Kiribati, there's like, I don't know, like maybe 10 games to a season, and you're going to get done with that really quickly. Then you have like 11 months of nothing in game. During those 11 months, if you plan it out right, you can get all of your coaching certificates done. And the board's happy to pay for it because it's an amateur club and nobody has a salary, so the board has money to spend, right? This is one of the problems with Football Manager. It's actually easier to do that than it would be to go straight to a top-level squad with absolutely no experience at all. So keep that in mind, right? Like if you're trying to make the game harder, it can't just be about like going to a weird country or bouncing around from place to place. Football Manager is notorious for not making a realistic game and a realistic situation for lower league and for non-league and for really like out in the middle of nowhere type sides. You'll recall, if you've watched this channel all along, of course you have, you'll recall the save that we had in Taiwan, right? We started off in, American Samoa, and then moved over to Taiwan. And then finally, I couldn't stand sitting here and watching the game process for like, hours upon hours every day. But the save that we had in Taiwan was very easy after a season, even though the team was awful, right? We just made a couple of transfers that made sense, and then all of a sudden we would win the league every single year. That's the problem, right? The game itself does not become difficult. Then it's a question of, can I get hired to go to a different squad or a different country that actually has money, and try to move up from there. So I don't really recommend like trying to jump in and jump necessarily all over the world like that. I would recommend instead doing something like what I'm doing now, the World Super League type setup, where things are a lot harder and where you have actual competition to play against, right? There may be some other things that you might want to try out, some other rules that you could make for yourself to try to make it just that little bit harder. I think one of the big ones would be to limit the number of transfers you can do and limit the number of players you can have on your side. Because any one of us who has any sort of experience with Football Manager knows that the path to riches, especially in the long term, is to go sign a whole bunch of youngsters, to send most of them out on loan, and then once they've developed into good players, to then sell them off for large amounts of money without ever having to play them, right? That's the easy way to do it. It's the same as, instead of chasing after stocks, of putting your money into a index fund and just sitting back and watching it grow and think, oh, I'm a genius. You're not a genius. You just took a step back and looked and saw what was happening and figured out the easy way to do it. So, like, I mean, you have to be careful with yourself. You want to create an incentive that prevents you from doing that. Maybe tell yourself that instead of hiring young players, you need to hire old players, players at the end of their career, players who are not very fast, players who maybe are not sort of meta-type players who are going to dominate the game engine. That's the sort of thing to think about doing if the game looks like it's too easy to you. But again, the big thing for you is to not worry so much about like defeating the game, completely dominating the game engine and all that stuff. What you want to focus on more than anything else is the storyline. It's the storyline behind Football Manager that will make it so that you'll actually want to come back and play the game. All this other stuff, figuring out how to get fast players and figuring out how to do this trick and that trick, it'll be interesting for you for like a couple minutes, and then you'll get bored with it and you'll want to go do something else or play some other game. But if you create and carefully craft a long-term storyline around your save, and if you set it up in your save so you won't get fired, right, so you can stay with the storyline, now that is going to be the thing that will keep you going. And if you're a content creator, that's also the sort of thing that will keep people wanting to read your articles, watch your videos, and do that sort of thing. That's the way that you take Football Manager and make it harder and yet make it more interesting at the same time, right? So there's just a couple thoughts I have. If you have any thoughts on the subject, let me know down below, and we'll have a discussion. We'll try to figure this all out together. That's it for now. I'll talk with you later. Bye.